Welcome to my top 10 board games of all time. All time! I've scoured the entirety of human existence for ludological artifacts, and these 10 put Senate and that Viking one that I can't pronounce to shame. This series is here to entertain you while I'm on paternity leave being a father for the first time. And I know what you're thinking, no, I won't forget about you 85,000 children that already see me as a father figure. As you know, finding a board game that you absolutely adore is life-changing. And whoever recommended that game to you deserves your eternal gratitude. But that's too much. What about if someone that has consistently recommended good games to you asked not for your eternal gratitude, but $5 or pounds a month? That seems like actually a really good deal. And what if I told you that this isn't a hypothetical scenario? It's me. If I've introduced you to some great games over the years, I'd really appreciate your support on Patreon. And as a thank you, I'm making 5 extra videos to make this top 50 a top 100 for my patrons, which you can watch right now. It was hard for me to distinguish between my top 10 games. These are all, for me, the best in their class. So I see this more as a list of 10 number ones. But then someone pointed a gun to my head and made me rank them. So here's the list, starting with number 10. And number 10 is The Resistance, which is my favourite hidden traitor game, where you're either lying to your friends or trying to work out which of your friends is lying to you. It's a game that you play with a big group, so if you've got 7 players, then 3 of you are spies, the bad guys that are trying to sabotage within, and 4 of you are the good guys, the Resistance, who are trying to work out who they are. The gameplay is super simple. There are 5 missions, and if the Resistance succeeds 3 of them, then they win the game. Whereas if the bad guys sabotage 3 of them, they win the game. Each round, the leader picks a team to send on the mission, and then everyone votes on it. And if that team gets approved, then all of those players are going to pick either a success or a fail card in secret. The Resistance are all going to pick a success because they want it to succeed, whereas a spy could pick a fail. And one fail is going to sabotage that mission and be a point for the spies. And that's the whole game. But in actual fact, the real game is the conversation that's going on between the players. The discussion about what happened in the last mission. Why did that one fail? Those 3 people were on it. Which one of them is the spy? Which one can we not trust? The Resistance have no idea who anyone is, but the bad guys know who the other spies are, so that gives them an advantage in terms of who they want to send out onto missions and who they want to defend when the accusations are flying. What I love about this game is that it all happens above the table. It's all in the conversations between players. The accusations, the protestations of innocence. This game does the best job of creating that environment, of making it tense, suspenseful, not knowing who anyone is. And the gameplay sort of gets out the way and lets you enjoy that. Now, of course, there are loads of hidden traitor games that do a similar thing, but for me, this one judges it just right. There are the shorter, simpler ones like One Night Ultimate Werewolf. They're a bit too chaotic, they're over a bit quickly. This one has more of an arc to it, that you can go on a journey as the Resistance. You trust one person and then change your mind to someone else. That a spy has a bit more to do in terms of convincing people that maybe they can come back from people thinking that they were a spy early on, and that it's simpler and more streamlined than something like Blood on the Clock Tower, which has so much more for a player to learn. It's a much deeper game that you have to understand how all the roles interact with each other, and I just don't have time or energy for that. Like, I don't want to learn how to be good at a game like this. I just want to innately be good at it by either bluffing or detecting another player. And that's what I love about it. It captures the purity of, can you look at someone in the eyes and lie to them? I'm not typically the best liar in these types of games, although I really enjoy the challenge. So I like that there isn't loads of stuff that you have to wrap your head around to make sure that your lie is convincing, because that can be a game in of itself. And if you don't follow the game enough to be able to say the right thing, then that's just letting you down before you even get to the point of whether you can lie. I've also played Secret Hitler and Feed the Kraken, and I really like them as well. And maybe if I played all of these games a bit more, something else would be further up my list. But for now, my favourite game like this is The Resistance. And number 9 is a Game of Thrones the board game, which is my favourite epic game. This game is a beast, because to play it, you need 6 players and 6 hours. You might watch my channel and think that I don't like big, long, heavy games, but that's not true. I like them when they're done right, and I don't think they're done right very often. If I'm going to commit 3 to 6 hours to a game. I have to love it. It has to be an incredible experience. It's a war set in the Game of Thrones universe between 6 houses, all trying to control Westeros. You've got the Starks of Winterfell, the Lannisters, the Greyjoys, the Baratheons, the Martells, and the Tyrells. And each of you plays one of those factions. You start in your home turf and you expand out across Westeros trying to conquer regions. You're getting into battles over certain places. You're trying to control 10 castles. If you do that, you immediately win the game. The game is full of intrigue and secrecy, which I love. Every player has a shield, and behind that, they keep their order tokens, which they're going to place face down on the board. So nobody knows what actions they're planning. So you're trying to work out what you think other players might do and react to that. You could be marching on Moat Cailin here, but so could the Greyjoys at the same time. Who's going to get there first? Or the Greyjoys could be attacking you at Winterfell, so you place a defense token there, which means you're more likely to win that fight. You're trying to outthink and anticipate what the other players are doing. Is now the right time to try and take that castle? Or do you stick around and try and build up your power for later so that you'll be stronger in a fight? Where the game really comes alive is in its diplomacy and negotiation. You can talk to the other players. You can say, if you let me take this castle, I'll let you take that one. You could say, I'm not going to attack you, but you could be lying. You can tell them one thing and do another, but of course then they won't trust you later on. And even better is that you can support another player in attack. So if there's a third faction that you both want to attack, one of you can attack and the other can support from an adjacent border, giving you the strength of their troops in that fight so that you're more likely to win it. What that means is that it's in everyone's interest to talk to the other players, to try and create deals, to try and find allies. You won't win this game unless at some point you have the support from other players, because that makes you so much stronger. My favorite times playing this game is when people get really into that discussion, that diplomacy, that you'll go into another room to talk to other players so the other players can't hear that you're making a deal together. Can you convince someone that they can trust you on this border? Because they might think, no, you're lying to them, and they get ready for a fight, but ultimately that's going to waste their resources if they spend their whole time freaking out that someone's going to attack them. We used to write notes on bits of paper and pass them under the table, or message on WhatsApp, trying to secretly communicate to other players. I just love the dynamic this game creates. It's so social, it's so interactive, it creates such memorable experiences. It's almost like playing a role-playing game, except everything you do fits the game mechanisms. You're doing it for a reason, to win the game, but you're acting like you would if you were in Game of Thrones, backstabbing, betraying people, saying one thing and doing another. And there are so many interesting mechanisms that fit the theme of what's going on. You have the supply barrels that if you don't have enough of them in regions you control, then you can't have as big armies because you're not able to feed your troops. You've got boats and ports and siege engines, all things that add interesting details to the game, that all make sense within the theme, but that also means that they add extra rules. And when I first played this game, it took me hours to learn it. And through that first few games, you're constantly checking the rulebook, trying to understand what's going on. But this is a game where I feel those rules intricacies are worth it, where they're all adding a depth to the decisions you're making, to the negotiation that you're having with those players, and to the story that you're telling every time you play. It's a hard game to get to the table. You need 5 or 6 players that are willing to play for 6 hours and not get upset when someone completely decimates you. I really love the Mother of Dragons expansion that they released for this, because it allows you to play with less than 5 or 6 players and still be an interesting game, because they keep the other factions on the board, but you can then hire them as vassals temporarily for a round to do your bidding for you. And it introduces the Targaryens and the dragons and Essos, all this really cool fun stuff. If you want to know more about it, I did a massive video on it. This is the epic game for me. I've played Twilight Imperium, but I much prefer Game of Thrones. I love the theme, I love the aesthetic, but what I really love is the gameplay. That's Game of Thrones. And number 8 is Watergate, one of the best 2-player games ever made. It's an asymmetric game. One of you is playing as the Nixon administration, trying to cover up the Watergate scandal, and the other is playing as the journalist, trying to uncover it. For the journalists to win the game, they need to win the right evidence and pin it to their pinboard so that it connects Nixon to 2 of their informants. So they're trying to create these pathways by winning the right color evidence. whereas Nixon is trying to win enough political momentum to ride out the scandal. And the way they win anything is through this tug of war. There'll be 3 evidence tokens out each round, and they're trying to pull stuff towards their side by playing cards, whereas the other team are trying to pull it to their side. Whichever side it ends up at the end of the round, that faction wins it. So if this bit of evidence is on the journalist side at the end of the round, they get to pin it to their pinboard. But if Nixon wins a bit of evidence, they get to place it face down on the pinboard, blocking off one of the potential paths. Everything that happens in the game is controlled by cards, and each side has their own deck. So Nixon has a deck of conspirators and events that are going to help them get away with it, whereas the journalist has other journalists and informants that are going to help them. Each card can be played for its strength, which allows you to pull something towards you in the tug of war, or an event, which are really powerful. And some of them are so good that you have to take them out of the game after you've used them. So you have to decide when is the right time to use it, because if it's not in your deck, you can't use it for its strength anymore either. What I love about the cards is how powerful they are, that they all feel like they could change the game if played at the right time. You're dealt your hand, and you've got to decide what order to play them in. Do I play them for the strength or the event? Because the other player could have cards that might block certain powers. And then you've got to decide, are you going to attack or defend? Are you going to try and win the tokens you need or stop them from getting the ones they need? The game has an incredible push and pull. You can feel so close to winning, and the game tempts you into making that killing blow. But then you overstretch yourself, you don't get the win, and then next round, they win out in front of you because you weren't defending at all. I love how elegant the framework of the game is. This visual map that you're just trying to create connections on, and this tug of war. It's so easy to understand, and yet the decisions are so tough. The theme can make the game seem complicated and dry, but it just isn't. It's so dramatic, the way it can swing from one side to the other, that both sides can feel close to victory and defeat at the same time. The theme doesn't interest me at all. I'm not an American history buff. I would play this game no matter what theme was on it, but I do appreciate that it connects with the gameplay and helps you understand what's going on even easier. I wouldn't choose to love a game about the Watergate scandal, but you just can't get away from how interesting, how tight, how innovative this game is. It's incredible. That's Watergate. And number 7 is Lost Cities, another incredible 2-player game. And this one's from my favorite designer, Reiner Knizia. The idea is that you're adventurers going on expeditions to try and find lost cities. And the 5 colors represent different expeditions. Really, what you're trying to do is create runs of cards in ascending order from 1 to 10, with 10 being worth 10 points. So those bigger cards are what you need to make your expedition score lots of points, but you've got to start with the smaller numbers and build up to them. And there's a real risk-taking feel to the game because you have to start these expeditions not knowing what's going to come out of the deck. You only have a hand of 8 cards, so you can only plan so far ahead, and you have to start with those smaller numbers. When you start an expedition, you immediately take a minus 20 point hit. That's your price that you have to pay to get into that color. So when you start, do you feel that you're going to be able to make those points back? Well, you'll get those cards off the top of the deck. It'll either be you or your opponent. If your opponent gets them, they're probably going to hoard them because they know how important they are to you. So there's a really interesting pull between the players with what cards you discard. On your turn, you can either play a card in front of you or onto one of the discard piles. And if you don't have cards of a lower number to try and start a good expedition, then you might choose to discard a card instead, then draw up from the deck, hoping that you get what you need. But when you discard a card, it's now available to your other player. And when they pick up, they don't have to pick up from the deck. They can pick up from one of the discard piles instead. So you have to be so careful not to give them a card they really need. Another amazing risk-taking aspect is these wager cards. You play them at the start of an expedition, and they will double the points you get from that expedition. So if you think you're going to pull off an amazing one, then you want double points, of course. But you don't know what cards you're going to get, so you could end up doubling minus points if you get none of the cards you want. The game is encouraging you to hold out, to wait until you can create those perfect runs, because if your expedition gets to 8 cards or more, you get a 20-point bonus. If you wait too long discarding cards just so you can draw new ones off the top of the deck's going to run out, and that's the timer on the game. You get to the end, it immediately ends. And almost every game of Lost City, someone ends up with a 10 in their hand that they didn't get a chance to play because they didn't anticipate the end of the game. There's a magic to this game, the perfect marriage of luck with what you get from the deck, strategy with how you use your hand when you discard cards, and play them, which expeditions to get into, and then reacting to what the other player does. That other player is so important to your success and you to theirs. It makes it such a great two-player game. I love it. Lost Cities. The only downside is that for a card game this simple, the box and the cards are just too big to ever take anywhere, which is why I'm so smug that I got this version when I went to Amsterdam from 999 Games. I just wish that they released it like this in English-speaking countries. And number 6 is Western Legends, which is my favorite sandbox game, and in my opinion, the definitive Wild West game. You take on the role of a character, such as Wyatt Earp, and then the Wild West is your sandbox. You can do whatever you like, all in favor of becoming a Western legend. The player with the most legendary points at the end of the game will win. But you can get them in so many different ways. You can go to the mine and roll these dice to dig for gold, then take the nuggets to the bank and get points that way. You can rob the bank, get loads of cash, then take that cash to go see a show and get points that way. You can play and win a game of poker to get points like that. You can collect cattle and either return it to the right ranch to get points, or rustle it, selling it to another ranch to get other points. Most of what you do will be in favor of the track that you're on, that you're trying to go further up, because in Western Legends, you can either be an outlaw or a marshal, a bad guy or a good guy. Both of them are going to get you points. You get on the wanted track by doing something illegal, like attacking another player or robbing the bank. You get on the marshal track by doing good things, like you could arrest one of the NPC bandits, or arrest one of the playing characters that is on the wanted track. It's in players' interest to chase after other players, get in a fight with them to try and arrest them and become a better marshal. Whereas the wanted players are trying to survive as long as possible without being arrested, because a marshal track is slow and steady. You get points, but it's not that great. In the wanted track, you get points at the end of every turn for as long as you're wanted and haven't been arrested. So you're trying to stay out there on the run as long as possible. I love trying to play on this track. You've got to always be worrying about where everyone else is and if they're going to try and arrest you. I love the variety of the things you can do in the game. You can really pick a path focusing on gold or cattle, or you can just do a mix of everything. When you end up in this town, you play some poker, you end up at a mine, you dig for gold. And there are all these item cards which you can collect which make you better at certain things. So you're going to want to buy a horse because that's going to move you around the board quicker. But do you get a Mustang, which is just really fast, or do you get a slightly slower mule, but which is better at carrying more gold nuggets? You might want a gun which will make you better in fights, but do you get a revolver, a peacekeeper, or a rifle? Whatever you do will send you down a certain path, but I really like that you can deviate from that if you want. It's the same with your character. You start the game with a special ability and certain items that might push you towards one path or the other, but you don't have to stick to it. I love that everything you're doing serves the story that you're telling, and that you're very much the protagonist of your story. The miracle of Western Legends is that it manages to achieve all of that with a relatively simple rule set compared to other games of this heft. And the way they manage to achieve that is with the cards they use. You're always going to have a hand of poker cards, and they get to be used for all sorts of things in the game. So you can play poker with them, or you use them in a fight. You both play a card and reveal, and the stronger one, the 9 beats the 2, they're going to win the fight. But then they also have text on. They can be used for actions at certain points in the game. It's a super simple system that's really easy to understand and has such a small amount of admin in terms of what you're doing that it makes the game run really smoothly. It's a far cry from other sandbox games who have so much more complexity going on, such as Merchants and Marauders, which was lower down my top 50, a game that I love but that resolves combat in a very convoluted way. And that's what I love about it, that it manages to deliver a big box, big game experience, but without all the baggage that you get with so many other big games. That's Western Legends. And number 5 is Spartacus, a game of blood and treachery, which is another epic game and another negotiation game. It's set in ancient Rome, and you represent one of the noble houses who owns gladiators and hosts gladiator battles. You only need 12 influence points to win the game, but they can be very hard to come by, and once you have them, you can lose them. The game plays across 3 distinct phases. It starts with the intrigue phase, which is where you're playing cards to try and get more points or gold. You could be attacking other players. But these schemes need influence to be able to play, so You'll often be borrowing influence from other players to be able to play them, but they can't see the card you're about to play, so you could lie about what it is. You could use it to attack them, but if they lend you some influence to play this card, you might lend them some later. So there's a real benefit to forging temporary alliances and helping each other out, making deals. If they have a card that will benefit another player, they're going to be asking for bribes to help them decide who to play it on. Or you might pay someone off so that they don't injure your gladiator or attack you. Money is changing hands at all times throughout this game. You don't want to do anything without trying to get some money from it. And I love the freedom that you can just give gold for all manner of reasons. You can make promises and take them back later. It is pure negotiation at its best. There are loads of take that cards you'll be playing to hold other players back, but that's not a rare occurrence. That is the game, and you've got to learn how to roll with the punches, to fly under the radar, to persuade people not to play them on you. In a typical game, you'll all be going up on the influence track in tandem with each other. If someone gets ahead too fast, then everyone else will be there to pull you back. So you've got to decide when to push for a win. Build up your strength enough so that if you do go for it, they won't be able to pull you back down. The following phase is the market, where you can bid on new gladiators and weapons that will make you stronger. The gladiators you start the game with are weak and pathetic, but as you build up your arsenal of gladiators and weapons, you're much more likely to win a battle. And the final phase is the battle. One of the players will have paid a lot of money to be the host, and they will pick who they want to send in gladiators. They could send in one of their own because they think they're going to win, or send in 2 other players because they want them to fight it out. The gladiator battle is a fun little dice game where your attack, your defense, and your speed are all going to have an impact. And as you take hits, that's going to come off your attributes, so you're going to have less dice to roll for attacking or defending next turn. The winner of the battle gets an influence point, but it's not just the 2 people involved that are interested in what's going on, because every other player has bet money on an outcome. They can bet on either side to win, and bet on a decapitation if they think one player is going to annihilate the other. So you're watching with a vested interest, hoping that you're going to get loads of money back off of it. Then the host can decide whether to kill the loser. But sometimes that's in your interest because you might have a special card that you can play which gets you a point if your gladiator dies. It's honestly just great fun watching it play out, hoping for the underdog to win. It has so many disparate facets that all manage to come together to create a coherent game that is unlike anything you'll ever play and is just so much fun. That is Spartacus. Number 4 is Lords of Vegas, and we've finally reached my favorite negotiation game of all time. The goal is to get the most points by building the best and biggest casinos in Vegas. But along the way, you're going to be gambling at other people's casinos and trying to steal casinos off of each other. You will start the game with lots, plots of land that you could build a casino on. And every turn, you're going to get income for those lots, which is cash that you can then use to build casinos. To build on a spot you own, you pay the price of that space, take a casino tile of the color you want, and then put one of your dice on it. There are 5 different colors of casino, and at the start of every turn, you'll draw a card off the deck, and that color will now score. So anyone that has a purple casino is going to get points for how big their casino is. The casinos are all effectively the same, but it all depends on how many cards of that color have already come out. If purple hasn't had that many yet, it's a great time to build a purple casino because then you're much more likely to flip one of those cards and score that casino. The bigger your casino, the more points you're going to get, but it can be hard to expand because what if you don't get the lots you need adjacent to your casino? Well, if the other players do, then you can make deals. You can pay them a lot of money to get that spot, and they know how much you really want it. Or instead of giving them cash, you could give them a lot somewhere they really need it, or trade the ownership of one of your casinos. If you really want to expand and nobody owns the lot next to you, you can sprawl into it. The game allows you to pay money and build on that land even though no one owns it. The trouble is, if someone draws the card for that land later on, they now own it and they own part of your casino. It's a fun gamble because it might never come up. You might get away with it the whole game, or it might come up the next turn and you didn't even get to use it to score any points. The best bit of the game is that you can remodel and reorganize casinos to try and steal them off other players. So if I'm adjacent to this big green casino here, that's worth loads of points. I can change my yellow one into a green and I now become part of that green casino. But I don't own it. It's owned by the player with the biggest die in that casino. But I can now pay to reorganize that casino, re-rolling all of those dice and hoping that my yellow dice ends up stronger than everyone else's, making me the new owner and stealing it off the person that put all that hard work into it. It's a huge gamble and often it won't pay off, but if it does at the right time and you score all those points for that green casino that they don't get, that is huge. Of course, if they've got 3 dice there to your 1, they're much more likely to reclaim ownership of it if they reorganize later on. It is capitalism at its most brutal. Casinos will be changing hands all over the shop. And that's what I love about this game. It's so entertaining trying to cling on to your casinos and trying to rob one off someone else. You'll give money to another player so that they can afford to reorganize and steal the casino off the player in first place. If you've got spare money left over on your turn, you could choose to gamble at someone else's casino. You roll 2 dice, and if you hit the right numbers, they have to give you money. It's more likely that the house will win, but it's a fun gamble and it can completely change your turn to make a bunch of money and mean that you can now buy the casino that you couldn't afford before. And that's this game all over. You've got to ride your luck at the right times to succeed in Vegas. I love that it combines making deals with each other, trying to steal from each other, and just gambling all your money away. That's my idea of fun. Lords of Vegas. And number 3 is Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, which is my favorite crime-solving detective game. Each box gives you 10 cases, and they start off like a Sherlock Holmes novel, giving you an introduction to the crime. You're told who's been murdered and where, and then you have to go out into London and interview the right people to get the right information to solve the case. So at the end of the case, you'll flip to the back of the book, answer these questions, and then open this envelope to see if you got the answers right. I love that the game doesn't hold your hand too much. You get to the end of that introductory excerpt, and then you have to decide who you're gonna go and visit. So you might wanna see the victim's wife. So you look up her name in the London directory, and then turn to that page of the book and read the interaction with her. It's written like a Sherlock Holmes novel, so there's a lot of colourful padding to the scene, which is nice, not just from a thematic perspective, but it also clouds what you're learning in a bit of mystery. If you don't pay attention to everything that you're hearing, you might not hear the vital bit. Each person you talk to is going to give you vital information for your case, so you're going to want to make note of it on a bit of paper. Or they might tell you something useless, but you're not going to realise that until later when you're discussing it all through. And that's my favorite aspect of these games, is talking it through with the people you're playing with, trying to get to the bottom of what's happening, because you feel like a detective piecing together the puzzle, learning from all the evidence, but also bringing your own theories into it. I love that when I play this, I start off with one theory as who's the murderer, and then it will change a few times through the story, like I'm watching a whodunit on TV. I love that the game lets you use your own initiative. You might hear that there's a watch at the crime scene, and then go and visit all the watchmakers in London to try and get their take on it, to see if they know who made it or who bought it. Sometimes you'll need to look locations up on this map of London. If you know that the murder happened in Hyde Park, then the fact that one of the suspects' hotel is right next to it is going to be a pretty big clue. And then you've got today's newspaper to pore over. There will be something hidden in all of this that will help you with your case. Someone that you can go and visit and learn more from. And I love that they hide that information amongst real newspaper clippings that were taken from newspapers from 1888. It does such a great job of immersing you in its setting with the newspaper, the way the characters talk as if they're from the era. Even the crimes are specific to that time. It's like taking a holiday to Victorian times, but without the bad smells. I love it over other crime-solving games because of its simplicity. The fact that you can just sit on a sofa and solve a mystery is so great to me. One of my favorite ways to spend an evening is to play this game with my wife. I just hope they keep making content for it because it's incredible, and at some point I'm gonna run out. That's Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. And number 2 is Pandemic, which is my favorite cooperative game of all time. And it's not even close. In the game, you're trying to save the world from 4 deadly diseases. And you're doing that by sending your characters to places on the map to treat the disease. That's the short-term problem, because at the end of every turn, new cities are infected. New cubes are going out. And if you ever run out of cubes, you lose the game. If a city ever takes more than 3 cubes, it outbreaks, spreading that disease to all the cities connected to it. And if you get to 8 outbreaks, you lose the game. The long-term problem is that you need to cure these diseases, collect enough of that color of card, and take it to a research station to find a cure. If you can find a cure for all 4 diseases, you win the game. But you've got to do that before the deck runs out, because the deck acts as a timer. You take 2 cards every turn, And if it ever runs out of cards, that's it. It's game over. You took too long to find the cures, and the world succumbed to the diseases. And those three threats all work together to create such tension in this game. You have to focus on short-term and long-term. If you become too fixated on treating the diseases, you'll never get the cures done. But if you work too hard on a cure and get distracted from the diseases, then they'll outbreak and you'll lose the game. But you're not without hope. Your hand of cards will allow you to fly around the board so you can get to the diseases quicker. But if you spend a card to fly, then you won't be able to use it towards a cure. And each character has their own special ability, which gives them a personality. The medic is much better at treating diseases, whereas the scientist is better at finding a cure. You have to work together, coordinate your special abilities and what cards you have in the hand to prosper. It's a game where you really need to discuss all the time what your options are and what everyone thinks. That everyone will have a different take, and that's what I love about the system, is there's multiple ways to skin a cat in Pandemic. And some people will think you've got to do it this way, others this. Some will want to focus on short term, others long term. And somehow you've got to come together and agree on what to do. It's a fascinating depiction of what it would be like in this situation. You've got a lot of minds with all different opinions, and can you actually agree and create a coherent strategy that is going to work for everyone? I love the setting of Pandemic. The grandeur of trying to save the world just feels really cinematic. But it's the puzzle of the gameplay that is what keeps me coming back. The interaction of how you can use your cards that makes you feel like you're making clever moves. I've played so many cooperative games where it just feels obvious what you would do each turn, or that you're doing stuff but you just feel beaten down by the game. In Pandemic, there's always hope until there isn't. There's always something that you can do differently. There's always feels like there's a way around this until there isn't. This is one of the first board games I ever owned, and it really transformed my vision of what a modern board game could be. I'd never played a cooperative game before, and now I've played hundreds of them, but I always come back to Pandemic. So many of those games are said to be inspired by Pandemic, but for me, none of them come close. There's a tightness to the puzzle in Pandemic and a punchiness to the gameplay, but that I've just never seen in another co-op game. I would also include as part of this Pandemic Iberia and Pandemic Fall of Rome that take this core system and manage to adapt it and change it in a way that is fresh and interesting, still keeping some brilliance of Pandemic, but also adding their own brilliance as well. I recently got rid of 100 board games from my collection, and I think it's a testament to how much I love Pandemic that I kept 3 versions of the same game. And number 1, my favorite game of all time is Codenames. And honestly, I would play this game every day of my life if I could. In fact, for a long time, I was playing it every single day. Using the Codenames website, I would play it every day with my 3 oldest friends, and we would chat over WhatsApp about our turns, and we'd just play it across the course of a day. And every day it would still be fun, it would still be challenging. That this game never runs out of ideas to keep me entertained. That it never becomes easy or lacks interest. And even if you take off all the hundreds of games I've played online, this is still by far the game I've played the most in real life. Codenames is a word guessing game. You play on teams, you're either the blue team or the red team. And one of each team is the clue giver. They can see this little reference card that is related to this grid of words in the middle, so they know which of the words they need to get their team to guess. They do that by giving clues. A clue is simply one word followed by a number. So I might give the clue mouse 3, and that's telling my team that 3 of these words are related to the word mouse. So then they're going to discuss through what they think it is. They're like, oh, well, a mouse comes out of a hole, so it could be that. And if they pick one, they put their finger on it, and if it's right, it goes down, and they can keep guessing. If they get it wrong, then it's over to the other team and it's their chance to have a clue. You're racing to get all your words covered up before the other team does. So you want to be bold with your clues. Mouse 1 isn't going to get you very far very quickly, but mouse 5 is ambitious. That's the kind of clue I like. That means you've got to find a clue that combines 5 of these disparate words. And that is a challenge I love. I could spend all day trying to think of good Codenames clues. And honestly, I have during lockdown. I'm a writer, so I love words, and there's so much room for creativity with the clue giving in this game. That you can find these little links, you can play on stuff you know about your friends. I love that you can be as bold as you want. You can combine 7 words together with this perfect clue, and then of course you give it to your teammates and they have no idea what you're talking about. And giving a bold, slightly dodgy clue is a huge risk, and the game will punish you for it. If you end up leading them towards the other team's words, that's going to give them a point and end your turn so that they can now have a clue and start guessing themselves. Some of the words are harmless bystanders. If your team guesses one of them, it's not the end of the world, but it does end your turn. And one of the words in the grid is the assassin. If your team guesses that, you immediately lose the game. And I love how that jeopardy completely informs everything you do. Every time you give a clue, you have to check it by the assassin first to make sure there's no possible way in which your team could misunderstand what you're trying to get across and pick the assassin word. Having this massive grid of words with so many of them being pitfalls makes that challenge of coming up with a clue so much harder, because it's not just about trying to come up with 5 words that are connected, it's about them being connected in isolation, that they could never possibly misunderstand the clue and pick anything else. And the bigger you go with your clue, that basically becomes impossible. This is the English language where every word has multiple meanings, and the game really plays on that. So you've got Queen, it could be about the Queen of England, about a queen of another country, it could be about the rock band Queen, a queen bee. Cast could be about a cast on your leg or the cast of a play, and you've got to be thinking about the other team. If they've got a clue left over from the previous round that could lead towards one of your words, you shouldn't clue that word this round. You should keep that blurriness in the grid so they're more likely to hit yours accidentally and you get a free point. It's stuff like that that you really start to think about after playing this game hundreds and hundreds of times. For example, if you've got the perfect big clue, do you want to give that at the start of the game? Because then that's going to clear out loads of your words that the other team are now not going to hit by accident. And I love both sides of it. I love giving the clues. I love guessing. I don't think it's a great gateway party game. It can be really challenging and people can get really frustrated trying to think of the perfect clue. I've played it where people just give one word clues, which I just find so boring. I want the bold clues. I want the push your luck and the drama that comes with picking the wrong word. I do like Codenames Pictures, although I recently got rid of it because I'm just much more about the word version. And I do really like Codenames Duet, but for me, it's at its best with the competition of the two teams, where you've got to really race to get out ahead of the other team. I could talk about it forever, and I could play it forever. That's Codenames. Those are my top 10 board games of all time. If you want to buy any of them, there are links below. And if you want to hear which games are in the rest of my top 100, become a patron of the channel at patreon.com/Actualol to get 5 extra videos that you can watch right now. I'm John Perkis, thanks for watching.